All right, we're going to go ahead and get kicked off here. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Chris Lindsay. Let's see if we can get you in there a little bit better.
I'm Ryan Powell.
So I'm Manta's CEO, and Ryan is Manta's founder and Chief Technology Officer. We'd both like to welcome you to our second of what will be likely a series of webinars. Thank you for taking time to be with us. We'd also like to take a moment to thank all of our investors, certainly the folks who joined us early on as part of Team Manta with the Republic raise, and those who have joined us more recently with the Start Engine raise. Suffice it to say that we take the trust and the financial investment that you've made in the company very seriously. And we thank you very much for that trust. We also very much recognize that without your support, what we are doing now and what we intend to do in the future wouldn't be possible. So thank you very much for that. As far as today goes, we're going to follow a similar format to what we did in our first webinar. And that being, we're going to go light on the number of slides. We want to make this as interactive as possible. And so we'll go light on the number of slides, then we'll move into a Q&A session whereby we got a lot of great questions from you all as part of the registration process. Ryan and I will go through those. And then we're actually going to open it up live for questions via the Q&A button as part of your Zoom screen. We'll take some live questions as well. And our intention here is to really address as many questions as we can possibly cover in the time that we're given. And then if there's anything after that, we'll follow up from there. Now, in the first session that we did last month, what we did, we provided sort of a holistic overview of Manta. You heard a little bit about our respective backgrounds. You heard about the history of the company. We dug quite a bit deeper into Manta's technology, and we also gave what we hope was a better understanding of what our vision is for Manta. Today, what we'd like to do is actually dig into some of the business opportunities that are out there. You're regularly getting updates from us about this successful trial and that successful trial. And when we provide those updates, we typically try to provide enough context for you to appreciate the significance of those results. Today, we'd like to unpack that quite a bit more and give you a sense of what we see that is really out there for the company. Now, I have to just two quick caveats. One is that we've already been counseled by Start Engine to avoid providing financial projections and limit what we're sharing there. That being said, we will certainly, our intention today is to provide a bit more context around some numbers. Hopefully it'll be enough for you to draw your own conclusions and see what we're looking at in more detail. The other piece is that one of the case studies that we're going to be covering this afternoon, we're actually in active discussions with that prospective client. So we'll share what we can about the results, but obviously we don't want to get too far into the details of what we're thinking from pricing and things like that, because that could certainly come back to bite us a little bit later, and we don't want to have any problems there. So, but again, hopefully our intention is certainly provide enough context for you to understand and appreciate what's in front of us here. So actually with that, I'm going to kick it off to Ryan to provide a little bit more, a reminder or refresher, if you will, about Manta, the background, and just sort of to level set everyone.
All right. Can I get the, yeah. All right, everyone. And thank you for joining us tonight. As Chris said, I want to do just a real quick level set to remind you of kind of what our technology is, what we do. And so this video shows our process using magnetite to clean water, to remove algae from water. And so let's get it all the way back to the beginning there. There we go. And so what we do is we can add magnetite, which is a magnetic sand, to water, and it sticks to all the contaminants in the water, forms these nice flocks. And with a magnet, we can really quickly clean the water and go from something that looks very kind of mucky and dirty and collect everything down to the bottom there. So you can see what this looks like before and after, and how clean the water gets and how quickly that happens. And so that's kind of an overview of the core technology, and we have patents and trade secrets around that technology. And then this is what we think is a better path to biofuel. And so our original pathway when we started out years ago was to grow, harvest, convert. And so now the better pathway we think is actually to grow, remediate, convert. And the growing is actually being done by other people where they have issues with algae in various bodies of water, where that algae is a problem, and they're actually willing to pay us quite well to remove that problem. And so we can use our remediation technology, our core magnetic separation technology, to actually go in, remove the algae, get paid to do that, and then ultimately we can convert that algae to crude oil using our hydrothermal liquefaction technology. And so that technology essentially is a continuous flow pressure cooker that really rapidly converts that algae to a renewable crude oil. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to Chris here.
All right, so hopefully that will, again, remind everybody, refresh everybody about the technology and where we are. And you may also recall there are really sort of three main markets that we're looking at today, that being wastewater lagoons and lakes. Then there's sort of more of the commercial wastewater, municipal wastewater treatment. And then the long-term game plan is the biofuels market. Today, what we're going to be talking about is really around the wastewater lagoons. And I'm going to use that. You'll see when we get into the second case study that we're talking about, I'm using that a fairly generous definition of that. But what is a wastewater lagoon? I know, and actually for me, just when we first started looking at this opportunity late last year, I actually didn't fully understand or appreciate what a wastewater lagoon was. And don't worry, we're not going to get too far into the details here. But suffice it to say, what a wastewater lagoon is a very simple wastewater treatment tool. It's often used in areas where there's small populations, generally rural populations or rural districts. And effectively what happens is wastewater comes in one side of the lagoon, or think of it as a pond, one side of the pond. The waste settles out over time and is deposited in the bottom of the pond. It's digested by microbes naturally. And as part of that treatment process, there's actually algae is required part of that treatment process to help with the conversion and help to feed the microbes at the bottom and make sure the conversion happens effectively. And then out of the other end of the pond comes cleaner water. That's the theory. When everything's working right and happy, that's what happens. And this picture on the left here is actually a large wastewater lagoon, fairly typical construction. There are multiple cells here where the water actually comes in at one end. There's certain amount of settling and digestion that happens in the first cell. It then moves to the second cell. Again, more digestion and processing. Ultimately, it will move, and there can be many of these various cells. Ultimately, it will move to a final cell and then be discharged. And discharge, that will mean into a local body of water. It could be a stream or river or whatever. And the whole idea is the water coming in one side is fairly dirty and going out the other side. Well, not fairly, it is dirty. Going out the other side is much cleaner. And obviously there are tight restrictions and regulations in terms of what has to happen to the water, what that water coming out of the other side has to look like. There are surprisingly large numbers of lagoons in the United States. A quarter of all of the wastewater treatment facilities, at least the publicly owned ones in the United States, are actually wastewater lagoons. There are over 7,000 of these lagoons in the United States. So there are a lot of them. And they are various sizes. This is probably a reasonable representation. Certainly when we did some trials out in Illinois and here in Maryland, this is probably on par with some of what we saw. So that's there's your cocktail discussion later today when you're talking about what a wastewater lagoon is. A couple of key things here is that despite the large number of these lagoons, they're having some problems. And this is actually an EPA number right here. Over 60% of the wastewater treatment lagoons in the United States have been out of compliance for some reason or the other in the last couple of years. This is fairly common. So that's a lot. That's a lot of these lagoons that are having difficulties. And unfortunately for these operators, these people responsible for these lagoons, they really don't have a solution. What often happen is that they will have an issue. For example, they have too much algae growing in their pond. What happens at that point, or their lagoon rather, when that happens, they can no longer discharge because there are too many suspended solids. They can no longer discharge from that lagoon into that body of water and still maintain compliance. So that's a fairly common issue. And we have a solution for that. And so that's why we're really keen on this opportunity in the wastewater lagoon side. Currently, there really isn't a solution other than what we believe we can provide with Manta technology.
All right. And so Chris kind of framed up, what the general problem is, what the market is. And so this is what our solution is. And so we're applying this technology that we developed to solve this issue. And you can see on the bottom, some of the water going in and then some of the water going out, what it looks like. But essentially what we have is we've built this technology into a mobile platform where we can take this basically wherever it's needed, when it's needed, and we can remove about 90% of the contaminants in the water. This is a cost-effective solution. The feedback we've gotten so far from operators is that the cost definitely works for them. And as I've said before, we have IP and trade secret around it, so we're well protected, and the technology is scalable. And so if we want more capacity, we just add more modules to the system. And so it's all well and good to kind of line up that the market is there, that it looks like we have a solution, but the rubber kind of meets the road when we go out there and show that it works. And so we've done a number of different pilot trials showing that this technology works in the field under various conditions, all the way from kind of the baking, boiling temperatures of summer here in Maryland, all the way down to the freezing winter in Peoria, Illinois. And so this is one of the pilots that we did. This was in Maryland. And this is a picture of the lagoon. It's a picture of the water going in. You can see all the nice green algae and then the water coming out. And down at the bottom, you can see some of the water quality parameters. And so we have turbidity, which is essentially water clarity. So the lower the clarity, the higher the turbidity. Total suspended solids, which is kind of what it sounds like. It's the amount of stuff in the water. Phosphorus, so this is basically the fertilizer that actually makes the algae grow, and then the algae cell count, so the actual number of algae cells in the water. And what you can see is that we have a nice reduction from inflow to outflow, and overall we have a greater than 90% reduction in this outflow. And as you might expect, the machine is very good at removing algae from water. That's what it's designed to do, and we get a 98% reduction on that. So we've done that again at multiple facilities, and it's worked at every single one that we've tried. And so we've gotten really good validation, both of the technology and that the market is out there and that the pricing makes sense in that market. So we've done this in Maryland, a couple places. We were out in Illinois, and 201, we got nice removal of the contaminants in each of these cases. There was one that was a activated sludge plant, so kind of a different type of a wastewater treatment plant. Doesn't use algae, but they do have problems with their outflow all the same. This one, we're looking at just phosphorus alone, and the phosphorus levels were ridiculously high in the inflow, and we were able to drop them down 92%. And so that application worked quite well. So you can see that we've actually gone out in the field and we've validated that this process actually works.
So a little bit of background. What are we talking about here? So as I'm sure you're all aware, most of the major ports in the United States require some level of dredging to maintain their shipping channels. Here in Maryland, we've obviously got the Chesapeake Bay and the Port of Baltimore. We've got a lot of dredging that's required each year because of silting in. In fact, the Army Corps of Engineers is pulling approximately 5 million cubic yards of dredge spoils from the bay, from these channels every year. And this is an annuity. This is forever. This is not, we do it one year and it's not going to happen next. It's basically something that's required every year to make sure that the shipping channels are remaining open. And what happens here in Maryland, so the Port Administration has, they take these dredge materials, they refer to them as dredge materials, we call them spoils. They actually take the materials and they deposit them in these types of, they call them containment facilities. Basically, this is a 100-acre lagoon. They will pump the dredge materials into this lagoon. This is actually an old picture because these walls are much, much higher today. They pump the spoils into this lagoon. They will later be dewatered and used for other applications throughout Maryland. But what they're stuck with and left with is this water that ends up in the lagoon. And their aim is to ultimately, once it reaches certain criteria, certain specifications, they can then discharge it here. This happens to be the Patapsco River. They can discharge it into the Patapsco River, and then add more spoils, discharge, add more spoils, discharge, and the cycle continues. Now they have some challenges. They have a ridiculous amount of algae that grows into this containment facility. In fact, all year long, and as you know, here in Maryland, although it hasn't been that cold this winter, but they have algae in there all year long. So they are limited in terms of their ability to discharge and maintain compliance. So what we've actually been doing, we've been working with them to come in and say, hey, can we help you address this issue with our technology? And so maybe with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Yeah, and so we completed this pilot relatively recently with them to actually go out and show that our technology could work, because the problem that they have is they need to get this water out, but they can't get the water out because it doesn't meet the discharge limits. And so they've been stuck for months and months not being able to actually discharge this water. And so that's where Manta can come in and actually solve that problem. And so what we did is we showed up, we had 3 targets to hit, and that's reduction of turbidity, so 70% reduction of turbidity. We're able to reduce that by 80%. Second target was reduced turbidity by 50%. We again crushed that. We got 84% reduction. The third target was 70% reduction in total phosphorus, and we got to 94%. And so this was total suspended solids up here for this second one. And so you can see the visual result over here. This is Sanjana. She's holding up some beakers of the water before it went into the machine and then after. And then we love our 5-gallon buckets. And so here's a 5-gallon bucket of what's going in and a 5-gallon bucket of what's going out. And so this pilot was it was a large success, and we're moving on to the next stage with the port for this particular project.
All right, so I'll close it up here. So as Ryan mentioned, we are in discussions with the port in terms of moving into phase 2. We can't really get into a lot of the details of it at this point. Again, simply, hopefully you can understand, just because it's early stage, and we don't want to say anything that might be problematic for us moving forward. Suffice it to say, that being said, we'll give you a little bit more than that just teaser. So here, if you look at it's the Cox Creek dredge material containment facility. So that's where we completed our pilot trial. So that could be opportunity number 1, and that could certainly be either we could work with them either through a service agreement. Again, we come in, basically we handle everything and treat the water as they're discharging, and or we sell them the machine and then we sell them the consumables and go that direction. We'll see how it plays out. I certainly see that it'll likely be a combination there of the two. The other opportunity while we're looking at that, so the one containment facility that I've highlighted, they're actually in the process of building a second 100-acre facility right next to the first lagoon. So they're already doubling the capacity for that facility. So that right there would double the potential opportunity that exists just at Cox Creek. They also have another facility down in Masonville. It's just a little bit south of, actually it's north of where the trial facility was for us. we really are excited about what's right here in front of us. We think there are some very real opportunities. Now, we also recognize this is far afield of what we were talking about for biofuels. Now, as Ryan said initially, we haven't given up. We still very much want to pursue the biofuels piece, but we've got this market that's immediately in front of us that will help us stabilize the company financially and put us on good foundation for our future. We know that the technology works, the proprietary technology works in these applications. The interesting thing is that we're regularly getting sort of new applications that we didn't even think about for the technology, with people now starting to reach out to us. So that's actually a lot of fun. You know, whether they'll ultimately pan out and we'll be able to talk about them remains to be seen. But again, like this, the Cox Creek or Maryland Port Administration opportunity, that one we didn't see coming. So we think there are more there. And I think as we get broader exposure into that community, our name will continue to pop up and be more to come. The other piece that I want to add is that this is not just a, hey, we do the trial and come home and pat ourselves on the back for a successful trial. We see a clear line of sight of how we can make a business out of this, and more importantly, how we can scale that business. So we're actively pursuing that. Now, all of that being said, is that we need to continue to drive our investment. Without the continued growth for our Start Engine campaign, we're not going to be able to build additional magnetic separators. We're not going to be able to drive the commercial expansion to really take advantage of the opportunities that we think are right in front of us. So thank you for your support there, and please, do what you can to promote us out there. If you haven't invested already, please do. If you have, please talk to your friends, family, colleagues about potentially investing. So with that, probably gone a little longer than I intended to. We'll shift over to the Q&A side. Now, for this part, let me go ahead and stop. I'm going to stop presenting, stop sharing my screen. I'm trying to avoid having my face right up in the camera. What we'll do now is we're going to cover a number of questions that we received ahead of time. Ryan and I are going to basically bounce it back and forth a bit. And then as you have questions on the Zoom screen, I'm not sure it's where it's placed, but there should be a button for Q&A. You can click on that button and type in your question. We have some of our colleagues behind the scenes helping us out. They're going to be effectively taking the questions as they come in, collating them and trying to send them to Ryan and I, and we'll do our best to address them. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and jump in. Let's talk about, where should we begin?
Let's see here. So we talked about some of the lagoon stuff. So
Yep.
There are some questions that kind of relate to that. So maybe we can
That'd be great.
kind of build off of that. So let's see here. We have a question. So how do you collect from ponds and where do you store what's collected? And basically the question is, if you do municipal ponds, it's definitely not going to be the little trailer. That is correct. The stuff does not go inside the trailer, but you'd actually be surprised how little material is produced because the machine concentrates everything so much. And so for some of the lagoons that we showed you where we did the pilots, it produces about one, we call it an IBC tank. It's about 250 gallons, about one of those every week. And so that's not actually that much. It's about a cubic yard per week. So you don't need all that much storage for the material. And those facilities as well, you can actually even dispose of it on site. So we're not talking about a massive volume of material.
All right, thanks, Ryan. I'll jump in. There's a question about the overall outlook for the company and timeline for expansion and growth. Overall outlook for the company, as you heard a little bit today, and actually we'll be doing another webinar here in the not too distant future, talking about another opportunity that exists in the municipal wastewater treatment side. But I would say the opportunities for growth, we're as excited as I know I can speak for myself. I'm as excited as I've ever been since joining Manta about 1.5 years ago. Again, because of the market pull that we're getting, the successful trials that we've completed, and the fact that the technology works. That as you know, collectively as science guys, makes us that makes it. That's the key for us. In terms of how we see things progressing, I believe that it's just a matter of time before we get one of these opportunities to fall for us. And then I think once we get that first one to fall, that will snowball, because we've had such positive results in a variety of these different markets. So I think it's just a matter of time here. I think also in this question that we're extending it into, where do we see break even? I see break even probably depending on a couple of things. Obviously, how quickly the revenue generation develops. I see break even late 2024 as a real possibility. The other mitigating factor that really is going to impact this is the raise, how well this raise goes, or how well we're able to secure additional funds. Obviously, if we're able to accelerate and build more machines, accelerate our commercial operations, I think that's going to greatly influence our ability to drive to break even much more quickly. So with that, Ryan.
All right, so Ross has a question here. How complicated is the technology to use? Could potentially franchising it out be a possibility in the future? So yes, to answer the second one, franchising is certainly a possibility. We actually have one of our larger investors who is having that discussion with us right now about expanding and doing franchising north of the border in Canada.
Right.
So that's certainly something that could be a possibility. In terms of how complex is it? In terms of wastewater treatment, it's pretty vanilla. There are some injection pumps. Mostly the core machine, the magnetic separator, is ridiculously simple. There's 2 electric motors on the separator itself, and so there's basically some pumps, some mixers, and a few electric motors. And we are steadily working towards making the machine more and more automated and more basically, so the system can run itself and can sense what's going on, which is honestly pretty gratifying to see, starting from a machine that was highly manual to something that can basically just mostly run itself.
All right, I'll jump in with one, getting into the nitty-gritty around financials. Please expand on the current state of Manta's short-term debt obligations and how Manta will meet them. I assume this is from someone who really dug into our financial statements that were released when we filed our Form C amendment to extend our campaign. So a couple of things. One is that amendment, we provided our audited financials for 2022 2021 and 2022. Now, our financials that we provided ended December 31, 2022. What's happened since then, and at that point, we had approximately $800,000 in short-term debt through almost exclusively through convertible notes, a couple with University of Maryland, one with Tedco and one with Exelon. About $600K worth of convertible notes there, and additional interest on top of that. In the beginning of this year, actually in Q1, we were able to convert all of those notes to shares. Again, this was all covered in the pages of the Form C amendment for our filing. But long story short is that our short-term debt has basically already been converted to equity. Exelon still has a $100,000 outstanding note, and that they agreed to extend that until September of 2024. So all of that's, with the exception of the Exelon $100,000 Exelon note, has been addressed.
Okay, so we have actually a question that came in on the registration form and also one that someone just put in. So basically, and sorry if I got your name wrong, but Danton put in a question about competitors, and we had a question basically about competitors in the wastewater treatment lagoon market, and how does our technology disrupt their solutions. And so I'll kind of handle that first part. So the general competition in that market is, as Chris said, building out a brick and mortar treatment facility. But the challenge there is that that facility typically is at least $1 million or a couple $1 million. And for the small communities, it's just really a non-starter to pull together that much money. The other challenge for those communities is simply finding an operator. And that doesn't seem like that would be that big of an issue, but to find someone to run even these lagoons is challenging, but to find someone that has the extra skills to run like a full plant is even more challenging. In the small community where I'm from, they have one of these lagoons and they cannot find actually an operator for this lagoon. They're trying to share an operator with several surrounding kind of communities. That's how tight trying to find a person is. And so what we do is we're basically bringing this pre-packaged solution in there where they don't have to do anything, and it's within their budget of what they can actually afford. And they only need the solution really part of the year. Let's see here.
I'll jump in here quick. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you done?
Yeah, I mean, Danton also had a follow-up about how will they affect your plans or forecast. I think in general, it doesn't affect it too much because what's happening in that market is the communities are just not going forward with that because they can't afford that solution. So it doesn't really affect things too much.
A couple of questions here on the business development side. I'll take two. One is, when do you expect the first commercial use of the technology? Technically, we've already had the first commercial use. Last year in Q3, we had our first paying gig, if you will, working with the Columbia Association here in Maryland for cleaning up a couple of their ponds. That being said, I think in terms of larger opportunities that exist, I think it's just a matter of, I would conservatively say, just a few months before we really start to get into a few things here. So I think that's underway. The other follow-on to that is, how big is your current pipeline of customers, and how solid are the agreements that you have? Basically, how many are under contract right now? I would say probably, if I looked at, and there are a variety of markets here, where we have immediate discussions, there's probably 8 to 10 customers and prospective customers in the hopper. In terms of having a solid commitment from any one of them, contractual obligation at this point, we don't have any. But as you heard before, we are in the process of discussing what could be a potentially sizable opportunity for us. And to be quite honest, the ability to hook into any one of these big ones where we are today would keep us very busy. And again, back to the raise, if we're able to accelerate, then we can exploit or take greater advantage of these other opportunities that are in the hopper.
Okay, so we had a question here from David Adima. And so basically the question gets around, so removing phosphorus. And the question was, are you monetizing the phosphorus removal credits in addition to removal services? And a second question, are you able to reduce N, so nitrogen? Nitrogen is one of the other major nutrient pollutants in waterways. So in terms of nitrogen, yes, we are reducing nitrogen. We're reducing particulate nitrogen and some of the dissolved nitrogen as well. So there's a yes on the nitrogen. We can't get all of the nitrogen, but some of it. In terms of the phosphorus credits, we haven't investigated all the states, but within Maryland, those credits are there, but they're not, the market is not actually working well in Maryland. Those credits are kind of traded within institutions. There's not really money that trades hands. It seems like there's a market in Virginia. I know we looked at that market a long time ago, and it didn't look like it would make economic sense, but certainly it's something that we're always aware of and paying attention to.
There's a question, do you believe or do you plan to license technology in the future? Short answer is yes, we certainly believe that's possible and likely. We're already well poised because of the IP that we have currently, and the fact that there are a fair number of trade secrets that are built into the system. So we think that would provide us a strong platform for a licensing arrangement. That being said, I think it would be unrealistic for us to assume that we're going to be able to get a licensing deal without first continuing to build a nice portfolio of successful trials or technical validation of our process and capabilities, as well as business validation. I think if we're able to build a nice piece of business where we can show the commercial viability of the opportunity or our technology, I think that would really, the combination of those two things, well, those three things, the technology, the business chops, and the IP, would really set us up to be in a good position for licensing of the technology. But yeah, we would certainly love to be able to do that. Yeah, that would be a great potential, but we think we need to demonstrate it first.
So there's two questions here that are related, so I'll kind of handle those together. And let's see here. One of them was how much capital and R&D would be necessary to get to biofuel production, and the other one was basically if we reached out to Breakthrough Energy partnership for investment. Their mission seems to align with Manta's vision, and so we have talked to Breakthrough Energy Partnership a couple of years ago, and at the time we were asking for too small of a check. We actually got through to talk to them. They came out to our facility, and they did that relatively quickly, but in the end, they really don't typically get in until check size is above $10 million. And so we're too early, and kind of, related to that on the R&D front, that's kind of the ballpark of how much money we think we would need to get the biofuel side moving forward. So we need a much larger check size to get there. With Breakthrough at the time, we certainly weren't far enough along to ask for that check in terms of what's expected, as you get to the larger and larger check size.
There's a question about plans for an IPO and timing. Currently, no immediate plans for an IPO. Again, we think it's important for us to establish our position as the technology and our place in the industry first, to really sort of have the credibility that would allow us to have a meaningful IPO. What I could potentially envision would be more, and what we would more aggressively pursue would be, some sort of strategic partnership, and this would be to leverage existing capabilities or technology. For example, a partner in the wastewater equipment market. There are a number of big companies out there that make billions of dollars selling and utilizing wastewater treatment equipment. Partnering with a great strategic like that would make a lot of sense for us, at least on the wastewater treatment side. And that I would see actually being more of a likely exit for us in the immediate future. Some sort of relationship there, given sort of where the current state of the technology is for Manta.
Okay, Ross has a question. Do you qualify, or will you qualify for government grants? We definitely qualify. We're looking at one right now that the state of Florida actually has. And that one is specifically for nutrient reduction and remediation of algae, so it's a perfect fit. The main challenge with that grant is that it has to go to a municipality essentially, and so you need to find a partner. So definitely, we always have our eyes open.
Back to a financial question. There was a question about what is the current valuation of the company, including the round from Republic. The Republic valuation cap was 6 million. Our valuation for the Start Engine raise was 9 million. It was increased largely due to sort of the acceleration of potential revenue for the company. So again, you've heard us sort of ad nauseum talk about sort of accelerating our ability to bring some revenue in. That was a big driver for the increased valuation.
All right, so we have a question from the registration form here. This one's kind of interesting. Are you feeling that the energy to do this again in the same or similar field upon exit? So I'm not sure if there's someone out there that's thinking about a venture to start. I think, we get to exit for this. I would probably take a bit of a holiday. I think my family would also probably appreciate that. But I think, after that, I probably would be looking to get into something else.
Yeah, I think from what I know of you, Ryan, I could see you taking maybe a brief pause, but I don't see you sitting around and playing a lot of golf or anything like that. I would see you getting busy again shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow on from our last question. There was I was talking about the IPO. Has your exit strategy changed? And again, just I don't want to beat it too much, but yes, it has effectively. I think two things. One, in terms of the potential window for that, but again, it's more of rather than potentially acquisition or partnership with, say, an Exxon or others, down the road for the biofuels piece. We see much more tangible likelihood or possibility for a strategic partnership or acquisition with some of the with a prospective wastewater treatment equipment manufacturer. For example, of this just recently, a company called Evoqua was acquired by Xylem, actually just here in Maryland or Washington, D.C., I think for $7 billion. So again, obviously we're not there, but there are many of these large wastewater treatment equipment and technology providers, that would be an ideal fit for us.
Yeah, so we've got a question from Monica. In the lagoons you've treated so far, can the extracted material be used for biofuel production? Are there barriers or drawbacks you anticipate related to the character of the algae? Yes, absolutely. The algae that comes from those lagoons is just as good as anything that we ever grew. In fact, the way that they're growing the algae is pretty much the same way that we would grow it. The only difference is the source of the manure, so to speak. So we would always use chicken manure, but this is coming from a different source. But it's the same thing. It's essentially a wild polyculture, which is part of the reason why we, think that growth method actually is one of the better ones, because it's used all over the place. But yes, that algae could certainly be used for fuel.
There's a question about sort of the runway and burn rate for the company. I think what I'll say is right now we've got about a 6-month window for our current burn rate. Obviously, our hope is to extend that, obviously, with the raise. I think it's important to note that the faster we're able to accelerate this raise, the more quickly we can drive our ambitions on the commercial operation side. So if we're able to accelerate the rate at which we're pulling in funds, that will greatly enhance our ability to get to break even a lot quicker.
All right, so this question from William: are phosphorus, nitrogen, or anything else removed in quantity and form that can be sold as fertilizer or other products? So we 100% looked into this. So the answer is yes, the material could be sold as fertilizer, but I would put a large but after that. The value of that material as fertilizer is very, very low. So it's not going to be able to drive a significant revenue stream from the sale of that.
Let me first scroll up a little bit so I don't have to change screens.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of ones up here at the top around that financials. These are all the new ones.
Okay, great. Thank you. So how much capital are you raising for this new phase? Currently, right now, our phase with Start Engine is for 1.3 million. If we're successful, or when we're successful with that, we would like to extend beyond that and look at another larger tranche thereafter. But right now, getting to the 1.5 million dollar range would allow us to really accelerate, at least for our immediate terms, to drive some commercial growth.
Let's see here. So another question here: where do you take the spoils from ponds to get turned into fuel? Once we would ultimately get to that point, it would really depend on the size of the job. So if you think about something like the dredge containment facility that we looked at, that is 100 acres. That is a pretty large facility. And that is something where that facility has problems with algae pretty much year round. As Chris said, we were there in January and they still had algae. In fact, they have some sort of magic going that they can grow algae with ice over the water even.
Yeah.
But so for a large facility, you probably would have actual conversion happening on site. For smaller facilities, you would probably centralize that. You would probably basically bring all the algae together to a larger centralized facility.
Again, I'm just worried about clicking off there and not. I'm just trying to look here. What would be a good amount, right? Okay, yeah. So the question from Miguel: what would be a good amount raised in the crowd fund to be able to reach cruising speed? That's a great term, meaning you having enough reactors built to grab those big players. Probably to get to that point would be ideally, the way we calculated it out would be I think 2.5 to 3 million of total funding. Right now we're shooting for 1.5 through or 1.3 through current Start Engine raise. To get to cruising speed, I think we would need to be around 2.5. And what that would enable a couple of things. One, that would enable us to build some additional harvesters, larger harvesters. And you'll hear, actually, I think when we do our next symposium, we'll be talking about actually municipal wastewater treatment. So that would allow us to build some larger harvesters. And the idea would be we can go out and do more and hire additional resources here. There's actually plenty of work to be done for some of these new markets just here in the greater Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania area that could generate several $1 million in revenue for us. That would sort of get us to what I would say maybe a lower cruising speed that would drive us toward break even. But we would use that foundation that we established on the service side of the business, again, to seed the market and drive some of our sales, our commercial sales through the equipment. Because frankly, it makes more economic sense. If we go out and we're charging somebody maybe $10,000 a month, to treat their lagoon or whatever. At some point, the economics flip and make more sense for them just to buy a machine. And so, but to get to that point where you've demonstrated enough of it out there, there's enough, enough of the operators can call, their buddy down the road and say, oh yeah, we, call Manta, we used their system, worked great. That's where we see the snowball effect really jumping in.
All right. So one question here is, how are things progressing for you and your vision? So I certainly would be lying if I started this company and expected to be working in wastewater. That said, as we have in the presentation, we think this is actually a better pathway to go for the company. And I think we are still doing good, which is really the core basement of what I founded this company to do. And so we're still going out, cleaning up the environment and also kind of doing some good in the world. So I think I'm, still happy with, with that prospect.
Just looking over here, there's a question that says, if you don't raise $1 million, will the Republic safes stay as safes while the Start Engine investment will convert to shares? That is correct. Just as a reminder for folks, we covered this the last meeting and we'll spend too much time on it, but one of the requirements, and this is not our doing, this is in the Republic Safe Agreement, for the safes to actually be triggered and converted to equity. In an equity event, there's two things that need to happen. One is that Manta has to agree to that conversion, which we would do. The other thing is that we have to raise a minimum of $1.2 million in an equity round like we're doing now. So that's just kind of the way it is right now. So certainly our hope and dream and ambition is that we're going to hit the $1.2 million mark and beyond, and then it'll be converted to equity. We're getting close on time here.
All right, so maybe I'll hit this last one here. So from Justin, have you looked into working with EPA regarding wetland remediation related to permitting of natural resource projects? Short answer is no, but I think what Chris alluded to during the presentation is that we are continually finding more and more of these opportunities, things that you would not even kind of think about, but that are out there. So we're confident as we go and we get our name out in the market that more and more of these opportunities will pop up. We just, as Chris was talking about, we got a call literally today from firm out in California, basically with, again, another one of these sort of issues that we would have never even thought of. So yeah, we expect probably more and more of that as we get our name out there.
Yeah, that's a great point. So with that, unfortunately, I know there are a number of questions we haven't gotten to, and we apologize. We can try to cover some of those on the, if you post them on the Start Engine campaign page. We'll try to address them there. Or if we, please, we'll be asking for some feedback on this. Please be kind, but please be honest. And if there's, again, good interest and momentum here, we'll continue to do these. Right now, we're thinking we would like to do another one in a couple of weeks to talk about our trials down at Marley Taylor and the wastewater treatment opportunities that are out there. Please give us feedback. We'll try to, again, address any questions that we missed. We apologize for that. And thank you very much for your time this afternoon and for your continued support of Manta. All right. Also, I'm sorry, one last thing. We will be posting this on the Start Engine campaign page for those who haven't had enough or those who have missed it. So again, thank you for your time and your support.
Yep.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.